Thank you, Shalina, and thank you so much for joining us, everyone. I'm Patricia, and I'm a rising fourth-year undergrad at UCLA, as well as a Pearson campus ambassador. As I'm sure we're all aware, there has been a recent shift to online education due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This shift has been quite chaotic for both students and educators, and along with this came a very different way of learning and a spectrum of quality provided to the student. The landscape is very much shifting in both positive and negative ways. I myself will be taking all of my courses completely online this fall, which I anticipate to be quite challenging, so I look forward to the discussion we're about to have on quality, equity, and accessibility. So last week, Pearson released a global learner survey meant to capture how learners view the impacts of the pandemic across the world. Over 7,000 respondents between the ages of 16 and 70 believe that it's unlikely there will be a return to pre-COVID world of entirely full-time in-person work and learning. As they come to terms with this new reality, learners want schools and governments to address inequality in the learning experience, and they desire digital skills they believe are needed to thrive in the new economy. This is a daunting task, though some say a huge opportunity to innovate the entire system to make it more accessible and equitable to more people. We have gathered a phenomenal group today to share some of the latest research, innovative ideas, and practical ways to build more equitable, accessible, and effective systems and experiences as learners in schools shift to an online environment that is likely to stay for some time. So let's meet our panelists. If you all could introduce yourselves and give us a brief overview of your roles, work, and experiences with online learning, and if you could please answer this one icebreaker. If you were a student approaching your first semester of fully online learning, what would you seek most from your educational institution?
I think I'm scheduled to start. I'm David Andrews, the president of National University in San Diego, and I have been engaged with various types of higher education instruction for the last 35 years, most recently at National University, overseeing a university that is 80% online and has been for the last 2 decades. So we had a distinctive advantage in understanding the needs of online learners. And if I was a student and was trying to get the most out of an online experience, I would want instructors who really knew and have been trained in how to engage students in an online environment, both synchronously when you're on screens like this, and asynchronously when you're interacting through other modalities, because it really is that connection with the professor and the instructor that makes the difference. It's just delivered in a different modality.
Hi, I'm Jody Greene. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning at UC Santa Cruz, and I founded the Campus Teaching Center 4 years ago, the Center for Innovations in Teaching and Learning, after about 20 years teaching in the literature department at Santa Cruz. And since March 13th, I have been known on campus as the instructional continuity czar. So I am the academic administrator responsible for herding the cats of remote instruction. If I had one piece of advice for a student right now, it would be to go out and seek out resources on how to be a great remote or online learner. There are some wonderful resources out there, and we've really been working with faculty to help them direct students to those resources. But just in case you get a number of faculty members who were not paying attention to those emails over the summer, go out and find out what's out there for how to learn well remotely, because there's a lot of great stuff out there, especially at a school like mine that doesn't have a strong history of online learning.
I'm Edward Inch. I'm the provost at California State University, East Bay. We have about 25% of our courses pre-pandemic were online, and so we had a fairly strong base of faculty that were familiar with teaching online and had achieved different certifications. For a student coming in this environment, it's difficult because you don't have the same access to your professors as you might if they're face-to-face with you. But I would take advantage of every opportunity you have for open office hours, online office hours, any of the kinds of interactive forums that are being run on whatever the platform is. And most importantly is most universities have ramped up their student support services, whether it be through advising or assisted learner support, supplemental instruction. Take advantage of those. It's your opportunity to create a network on campus of support systems, but it's also an opportunity to get to meet more people.
So I believe I am last and next. I am Ajita Talwalkar Menon, President and CEO of Calbright College. For those of you who don't know, Calbright College is a California community college that has been recently created to provide a focused effort to provide flexible learning opportunities for working adults and for economically dislocated Californians. I come at this work from a long career in the federal policy world, particularly on the heels of the last economic recovery, where I've been a student of the ways in which online has been done badly, when the incentives are not in the right place and when the focus is not on a high quality learning experience for individuals moving through institutions. And so I come at this with taking a lot of those lessons to heart. I love this icebreaker question because the idea of kind of putting myself in the shoes of a student approaching that first semester is something that I think about day in and day out. And if I were that student, I think I'd really be looking for flexibility, affordability, and also navigation support, really a clear and simple path towards the timely completion of the kind of education and skills that I'll need for reemployment. And I just want to highlight, I think that's not just what I'd be looking for as a student, but what we're actually hearing from prospective students that the college is focused on serving. Those whose lives have been upended by the pandemic, those who are experiencing either job loss, reduction of work hours, or responsibilities have overtaken them. They're caring for a child or for an elderly parent. And that's kind of highlighted by a recent survey that we did of our students, where nearly 60% of our respondents had experienced either furlough or reduction in work hours or job loss for themselves or their spouse or partner. So these are absolutely things that are at the heart of the approach that we take and the equity lens that we put on this next phase of online learning.
Okay, great. It's very lovely to meet you all. Let's just go ahead and jump right into some questions. So up first, in last week's GLS results, many of the respondents thought that an online environment provided more access and a more equitable experience to more students. However, they also were concerned that the digital divide still persists for those learners who aren't digital natives. So David, can you share what you have experienced with your team at National and how you are planning the fall semester for your students and how you seek to address this concern?
I think this is a great question, and I think most of our students have grown up in more of a digital age than our faculty, so I'm just as concerned about our faculty as non-digital natives as I am our students. In fact, maybe more concerned about the faculty. But I think the issue of equitable access is a broad issue, and it's not just do you have a computer and broadband. As Ajita said, it's really tied into this notion of lives having been disrupted, and something as simple as the time that you can find to do your work is an access issue now. When we have families sharing computers, we have people in dense living conditions, some unemployed. Our students are coming back to school to get to finish their degree or to find a new career, and many times they're doing their work at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because they have families, they have other responsibilities. There's a lot of pressure on our students, so access needs to be thought about in a very broad way. Affordability is certainly part of it, but affordability of time and effort and energy to get the work done is an equal part of the equitability argument.
Thank you. Those are some very good points. This next question is for Jody. In your role at the Center of Innovation in Teaching and Learning, what can you share about the professional development teachers must receive to ensure effective learning in an online environment? What are the best practices that you've discovered?
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, I think there's one set of practices that were kind of the emergency practices for last spring. The very first thing that we did was to put up a Keep Teaching website. And also a Keep Learning website, which is something that many other institutions didn't do. We wanted our students to have a place to go, a kind of one-stop shop where they could get all the resources. If you weren't going to do anything else as an instructor or a student, you could go to these kind of one-stop shop websites and find what you needed. In the spring, we also put on, really basic workshops, how to use Zoom for teaching or just how to use Zoom. And also some fairly hastily put together workshops on trauma-informed teaching. We could already tell that we needed those last spring. I think in terms of best practices that we've been engaged in all summer, we took the time to slow down and to really think about how we, as a very small team of 8 or 9 that were supporting 2,000 instructors, could do the work that we needed to do, knowing that no one is employed as an instructor on our campus in the summer, other than some graduate students. So anybody who was giving work would be doing it for free, basically. So the first thing we did was we built a course in Canvas about how to design a good remote or online course and how to transition an existing course. So we used the LMS to create that. Then we gave instructors the option to either be in a cohort or to do it self-paced. Many of them chose to be in a cohort. About 300 faculty members chose to participate in 10-person cohorts supported by instructional designers. And that way they developed a network of people. And, lots of people in the faculty development business will tell you that, we've been trying to get people to come to us for help for years. And now they're, beating down the door. So putting them in learning communities allows us to scale the work that we do. Another thing that we did was to take the faculty-facing support personnel and the student-facing support personnel and put them together for a series of events on fostering care and community, so that we were basically developing things together, particularly around community, because we knew that the #1 problem that our students were going to face was feeling disconnected. Entering students, of course, the most, but all of our students. So how could we create, even in our course design, opportunities for students to connect with each other? And then finally, we identified what we considered to be the most critical workshops. So in the STEM fields, the biggest problems that emerged in spring were around how to do effective assessment and how to manage academic integrity. We had very high degrees of cheating, and I've seen all the stuff out there about cheating and how we should stop talking about cheating. But the fact is that in our entry-level STEM courses, where it's most essential for students to learn, we saw a lot of cheating, even in low-stakes assessments. So we've been working on that. We've been working on crisis-informed teaching. We've been working since the George Floyd killing on workshops on facilitating conversations about race, because that's going to be a big part of our campus this summer. And then lots of material on how to support student learning. As I said, we can ask the students to go seek that out, but we also have to help instructors help students learn well. Because as David said, they are digital natives, but they're digital natives for entertainment. They're not digital natives for learning, the vast majority of them. So we have to help students learn how to learn in a digital environment.
Thank you, Jody. That was amazing. I definitely could have used a workshop on how to use Zoom. So this next question is for Edward. CSU was the first system in the state to announce a full shift to remote learning for the fall semester. That may have given you the longest runway to make the shift for faculty, training, ensuring device access, tech and hardware development, etc. As that semester nears, what have been the 3 largest issues to work through, and how have you addressed them?
It didn't feel like a long runway. It felt like it was that long. Before I answer, I just want to key off something Jody said, because I think it hits at the heart of this, is that our students are not digital learners. They didn't grow up that way. They want face-to-face classes. We've heard that regularly as we've had more and more of our curriculum online. The importance of the connection they have with their professors, their advisors, their mentors is really important, in transitioning relationships like that online, so a student feels included and belonging. You don't have that as easily in a digital environment unless you're very proactive about how you do it. Now, so we had a relatively long runway, and essentially there were 3 large areas that we knew we needed to address in the time we had to plan. And the time really isn't that long once you're in the middle of doing it. The first was equity and access. The majority of our students are first-generation students. The majority of our students come from very diverse communities around the Bay Area. They're from all different levels of socioeconomic capabilities. And so finding ways that our students could equally access their curriculum, be taught how to be online learners, that takes some time. And so equipping students with hotspots and equipping students with laptops were very important. The thing that emerged as a high priority for our students, though, were for those living in multi-generational homes or have many distractions in the home in which they live, that they didn't have study spaces, a place to go that was safe and quiet and had broadband internet so they could access their curriculum. And so providing those spaces on campus became very important, a place for students to be where they could do their study without interruption. The second big area, in addition to the equity and access piece, was around faculty readiness. About 25% of our faculty, as I mentioned, have been teaching online, but the others had not. And that was largely intentional. And the thing I think people are not always aware of is teaching online isn't just taking a face-to-face course and transplanting it into a digital medium. There is an art to it. There is a skill to it. And so over the summer, 190 of our professors went through intensive online training about how to plan for transitioning courses, what is the right modality, how do you design the learning materials that are appropriate for an entirely digital environment. And it's not just a set of skills that somebody's going to learn in a 3-month summer, but there needs to be ongoing faculty development so that we have professors in this environment who are very culturally competent teachers, but in a digital environment, it's difficult sometimes to maintain the kinds of levels of cultural competence that you want all of your faculty and your advisors to have. And so I think all of those played into how we prepared our teachers and advisors and all of the support services to get ready. And then the last thing became a real significant issue for us to grapple with is not all courses can equally be taught online. There are some courses that require specialized equipment or facilities that some students may have access to at home. One that came up was a piano. Some students may have access to that at home, but others may not. How do you teach certain kinds of courses? Welding, music, science, if they're not physically there. And so we went through the curriculum working with our faculty to determine what are the courses that absolutely needed to be online, either because there was no other way to teach it, such as learning nursing and being in a nursing lab, or because the only way that we could ensure equity was to provide the equipment for students and have them be on campus in as safe an environment as possible. Those were the big 3 things that we had to grapple with.
Thank you. Okay, my next question is for Ajita. First, I'd like to congratulate you on your new role leading Calbright College. The college is in its infancy now, but please tell us about your roadmap and what you hope to provide working learners with the system's first online community college.
Well, thank you, Patricia, for the congratulations. I am absolutely very excited to take the reins. I think the first thing that we're thinking about in the context of a roadmap is actually reimagining the student experience in ways that technology can enhance a more student-centric view of the programs and services that the college offers. So, how do we connect our students from the first point of contact with them, establish that relationship that will help them, that we can help them navigate their education? How do we stay connected to them through their program journey in ways that are the most impactful? So how do we kind of maximize the human aspects underlying the technologies in the ways that support students? And the point of that is really to get ahead of identifying where students may need additional support or proactive intervention, and thinking about this in the context of having an equity lens around it. Because we are taking a very population-specific workforce approach to the college, that's what we're tasked with. It is different than a conventional kind of programmatic or institutional lens. So we can build a college with the analytical and the technology structure that helps us better understand what works for different populations, and to be constantly kind of adapting ourselves towards building and improving our programs and services. It is also the recognition in the context of where we're going that we're not going there alone, and that there's no design of a silver bullet online solution that is perfection, but what it really is what the task is to also deeply understand our operating environment, how we're connected to the regional and education systems, the regional workforce systems, in the ways that they exist, so that we can figure out how to best leverage them, or where they need to be, adapt them in support of services for economically disconnected Californians. So how do we connect folks to place? And in building our programs, we're really building the intelligence and kind of an understanding of the challenges that students may face or are facing, using a human-centered design approach in the design of interventions that are aimed at overcoming those gaps. So if we're confronting a gap in device or broadband access, we are tending to it by a device hotspot or lending library. If we're confronting the kind of patchwork and strained social safety net that are creating barriers for our students to really have enabling conditions to learn or train in, we are helping navigate support for our students so that they can find access to services they need to create those conditions for learning success. Similarly, we need to support and are supporting our faculty in this shift that has to happen. And I think Edward started to talk about it too. It's a pedagogical shift focused on more passive instruction to andragogy, an adult focus of education that is competency-based, that leverages the best thinking, our best understanding of learning sciences when we actually design the lessons and the learning conditions that are specific to serving the population that we're serving well. Right now, we have very quickly digested 7 months of analysis on our beta cohort of students, and we're in the middle stages of redesigning our offerings, kind of built with that roadmap in mind. And front and center is how we're really knitting together the lived reality of our students. And I think, the point is that we've learned from experience. Experience has told us that where conventional education and some of the inertia of bureaucratic and siloed systems and structures let people fall through the cracks, we need to be careful not to replicate those challenges in the design of the new college.
Thank you, that's great. I'd like to direct this next question back to David. In terms of equity, what steps should schools take to arrange systems that attract and ensure they are providing an equitable environment to the widest variety of students, including people of color, students with disabilities, first-generation students, etc.?
I think that's a great question, and I'll build off of Ajita's responses. The first step is recognizing and understanding that many of us have very heterogeneous populations of students, and there's not a one-size-fits-all. The first activity is in getting a much deeper understanding of who our students are, what their needs are, and where the inequities have been in their life and continue to be, so that we can address those issues in terms of access. We've adopted a personalized approach that we refer to as precision education that starts with knowing enough about your students, patients, if you were talking about precision medicine, in order to make sure that the diagnostic is followed up with an intervention that's personalized to meet the needs of that particular student. And we do a pretty poor job in higher education of tracking that information to be able to even start with the predictive analytics that are perfectly available right now in order to determine which interventions are going to be most effective. And I would say both instructional and non-instructional interventions. When we talk about student support, we have a dearth of information that could be used to help us determine which specific motivational strategies, pragmatic strategies around the context of their learning could be used in order to help students. And so it's a systemic approach to holistically supporting students. It starts with, and I've spent a lot of time at our institution saying you should not be talking to a student unless you know exactly what their goal is and what the context is that they're in trying to achieve those goals. So the notion of personalized learning plans built off of individual goals is right at our fingertips, but we have to redesign our educational system and not worry so much about which courses they're in and who's assigned to teach those courses, as we are thinking about this student life cycle and the impediments across the student life cycle that lead to inequities. And if we don't think about it that holistically as an ecosystem, then we're not going to be successful.
Thank you, David. So this next one's for Jody. In our last webinar, we focused on the topic of unconscious bias and the implications for education and the workplace. How can we support improvement in this area through better teacher training and/or the selection of content and materials?
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to start by saying I'm really struck from listening to my colleagues by how consistent the challenges are that we're facing across the California higher ed landscape. You would think maybe in the UC, I would be thinking, oh, these are not really the same problems that we're facing. They're exactly the same problems that we're facing, from making sure that our students have the technology they need to figuring out who, has so many hours to work at home or kids to take care of. I mean, it's really shows us that in California, we're being quite successful in educating the population of California. And that's, that is across the system as a whole. I think I'll really take this question a little bit beyond the matter of unconscious bias to really address, what we as faculty can be doing regarding educational equity. The educational equity has come into very clear focus this summer, and it's not because of COVID-19, and it's not even because of the anti-racist uprisings. It's been there as an issue waiting for us to sort of get our attention for at least the years that I've been doing the work that I'm doing, and probably more years than that. And so I feel like all that the COVID-19 and the anti-racist movements have done is to speed up our preoccupation. And in that sense, I think that's a blessing. I think we really have our attention right now focused in a way that we haven't before on the needs of our students. I also want to say that at a Research One university, it is incredibly complex to ask the faculty to be much more involved in how in the educational side and the educational equity side, because their responsibilities are so large in other areas, and no one is thinking about how to take anything off their plate when they're asking them to become much more interested in making sure that we have equitable outcomes. So the three areas that we focus on in my unit are obviously, as you say, content, syllabus design. And in climate, we've had lots and lots of faculty this summer who have wanted to read about anti-racism and anti-racist pedagogy. I've been really moved by how many people have reached out specifically to ask about anti-racist course design in online and remote environments. So people are really thinking about those design and content and climate issues. But really, I think where the work has to be done is overall in a data-driven universe where we're thinking about where the equity gaps are and how we as a faculty play a role in closing those gaps. It's not the whole role, but we do have a role. And so the two places that I focus my own work, one is on assessment, program learnings outcome assessment, and how we can use that as a place to drive curricular transformation. That might be the only place where a faculty member learns where in the department landscape as a whole, students are getting hung up. So how do we use this mandatory activity that we all have to engage in? Once you talk to faculty about equity in the context of PLO assessment, they become much more interested in PLO assessment than they were when they thought it was bureaucratic busy work. So I've been really encouraged by that. And the other thing that you have to do is you have to figure out how to change the faculty review process in order to incentivize, if not require, some kind of attention to educational equity. So if an individual faculty member wants to do a deep dive on equity in the courses that they teach and then make curricular transformations at the level of the individual course to try to close those gaps, that's something they should be rewarded for, because they're almost certainly doing that in addition to their research and grant winning and their university service. So I think we're not thinking, particularly in R1s, in very sophisticated ways about what the labor costs are going to be of asking everyone to be much more interested in equity. And until we solve that problem, we won't be successful. So that's where my concerns are in the faculty development sphere.
Right, thank you. Edward, I have another question for you. How do you see business playing a role in informing the continued development of online curriculum and training? Are there more opportunities for collaboration in this virtual world?
I think there's some tremendous collaboration opportunities. The pandemic forced some changes that were pretty obvious, right? Within 4 days, we moved entirely online where we'd only been 75% or 25% online. So that forced a change quickly. And it forced some challenge to some of the existing assumptions about what a quality education is like, as our faculty grappled with how do we transition the curriculum in a way that we don't lose our learners, right? And so one of the big things that got challenged out of this was, what is our role in the region and how can we partner better? Because there's, we're a 60-year-old campus, largely face-to-face, that grew up with the notion that we work on 4-year degrees and some master's degrees, and our focus is on this period of time where we're going to educate students. But now all of a sudden, our graduate programs are having more adult learners come back to them. Our degree completion programs, more adult learners come back because they can come back to them in an online environment that doesn't require braving the traffic around this area, doesn't require them being here on a Saturday and missing time out with family, doesn't require things that involve their physical presence somewhere else. And as our faculty skill developed in the ability to deliver an online education and our ability to support learners with an online education, there are now more opportunities that our faculty see with our alums and with some of our community partners and business partners that perhaps we can design and tailor-make programs that fit the needs of adult workers to upskill or reskill in very specific industries. And we live in a part of the world where the economy moves quickly, technology moves quickly, and it makes sense for a university to be nimble and adapt to the changing needs that the region's businesses have. Our facility with being better at online instruction and collaborative program development with regional partners, I think will be an opportunity that the university will have, and all of our universities will have, over the next few years. We're already seeing our Masters in Business growing much more than it was, for example, just a few years ago with the change. So I think there are tremendous opportunities, a lot that can be done over the next few years.
I agree. Thank you. So this next question is for you all. Though we are in the early stages of a fully online learning environment, it seems likely that this will impact education for a long time. What long-term impacts do you see to the way education is provided as a result of changes brought about by the pandemic? What opportunities are there for different educational institutions and systems to support each other through these changes? Let's start with Ajita.
Thanks, Patricia. It's funny, I sometimes feel like the most challenging parts of higher education in our country is that it's siloed and idiosyncratic. So it's built from either the perspective of tradition and culture around exclusionary admissions policies, or kind of an open access myth that fights back against measurements and outcomes. And I think it's, too often, and we all grapple with this in our day-to-day, it's not practically designed with the end in mind. So we talk a lot about caring for equity, but we tend to not plan backwards from the outcome that we're trying to facilitate for someone. And what feels really different about this moment, and what I think is enduring, is that there's something more unsettling that's happening. There's a more of a real question around higher education in this moment, where we'll hardline some of these widening gaps in wealth and racial equity. And what is the most powerful change that I think presents an opportunity for us is a lot of what David, Edward, and Jody and you have highlighted already, that this is no longer just a question of modality. It's not online or in person, but we get to focus on the right questions, on the parts of our system that are working or not, and for whom they are working or not. And I think that is the exciting part of what higher education can do, which is to actually meet individuals where they are and to very practically assist our communities in the process of economic recovery as we build our understanding of what's needed to transform things needed in a transforming labor market. So I see this as really the enduring opportunity of the work that higher education, all of our institutions, really will do over the course of the next few years. And though all of us have described the ways in which we've kind of had initial scrambles adjusting to new modalities, I see more and more institutions starting to grapple with how to do this well for diverse populations. And as far as what we can do together, I actually think there is a real opportunity for us to add value and to accelerate the conversation around new solutions. And what's going to be the deciding factor there, I think, is surfacing and highlighting and sharing how new approaches re-engineer that work in these population-specific ways. But I think perhaps what might even be more powerful and more meaningful to all of us in terms of accelerating those changes is really to talk openly about the challenges that we see in this work, about the setbacks that we face, and that through improvements that overcome those setbacks get us to the kinds of best practices and successfully serving those populations. Like this is a moment in which the art of the sausage making actually does matter, and having the data analytics underlying our understanding of what conditions we're testing out new solutions in and what we're learning from them should be open and should be sort of pursued in that spirit of progress. And I don't say that lightly. I think it's very, very difficult to do in the political environments that we all operate in. So, you know, there's a desire for a solution and less of a reflection of the degree of difficulty involved in really seeing this kind of change happen. So there are absolutely ways to systemize that. There are absolutely ways to mitigate the risks around trying new and innovative things. But it really only works if we sort of have the collective strength of a group of institutions that is kind of a growing movement of institutions that decide to do things differently and that share that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in to say for those of us who were not in a largely technologically enhanced environment prior to COVID, I think, you know, one of the worries at Santa Cruz has been, oh, you know, someone wants to drive us to a completely online university. And I think if there's one thing that COVID has told us, it's our students really want in-person instruction. Those who were already getting it definitely want it. That isn't to say that all students want it. So I think, you know, one thing that I do think will happen is a much more technologically enhanced education for all, right? Once you've made those lecture videos, you're going to go ahead and use them. And I think that potentially could lead to more adaptive learning across the board. And I think that is going to be absolutely a game changer, particularly in the gateway courses that we offer on the 4-year campuses, but the gateway courses at the 2-year campuses for students wanting to transition into the 4-year campuses. Whoever thought that 600 students in a lecture hall are all going to learn physics at exactly the same rate? Like, that was a crazy idea. And, you know, I'm on some building thing right now about a new building, and I keep saying to them, if you're going to put a 600-seat lecture hall in there, make sure you have a plan B for it, because we shouldn't have those in 10 years. So my real hope is that we're going to get people who, you know, haven't necessarily had the time or the energy or the interest to really think about how to use technology to enhance student learning, to realize that it's not only interest of their students, but it's in their own self-interest to leverage that technology. So, and I'll just, you know, say yes to all the cross-sector collaboration that we are not doing that we should be doing, that Ajita already mentioned.
I used to work at a small university with a group of faculty members that there's no way we're ever going to do online. It was terrible, too disruptive. It'll destroy the connection between faculty and student. At the time, the university had just introduced emails, what they were rebelling against. We'll never use this. And yet now, well, email's seen as an older generation thing, but you know, email was transformative and now is a tool that people learn to use well and some not so well. And I think what the pandemic has caused us is a rapid expansion of people capable of using a new suite of tools that we can add to the toolbox. The thing I think we have to stay focused on is it's not just a hammer that's going to hit every nail, that the technology we have with people who are adept at teaching and learning in this environment, you pick the right tool for the right occasion. And for us, it gets back to providing access for all of our students in an equitable way, so that they all can work with the curriculum and the learning materials that they need to achieve their educational goals. And my hope through this is, as we rapidly are using these new tools, that we think carefully about the ethics of how we use them, that we think carefully about how we equip all of our students and faculty to use them on parity, and how is it that we assess and adapt and learn from the process that we're going through now.
I think those are great points, and I'll build on that tool analogy. You know, I've had many people come up and say, online settings are challenging and not on par with our on-site settings. And I like to point out that the first time I do anything is pretty bad. And so the first time I try to build a table, I probably should go to IKEA and get enough instruction. Or the first time I try to paint unassisted, I should probably use paint by number. Over time, that's not going to end up providing the product that I'm looking for. But in these initial stages, I think we're learning to use the tools as best we can, especially for those who haven't been in this space for very long. And we shouldn't criticize people for that learning curve, but it's going to get better and better. And once it gets better and better, you're going to see a recognition that our face-to-face time, whether it's on-site or synchronous online, is more and more precious. And I don't think that's going to change. And so don't waste it. Don't waste it in a one-way conversation. Don't waste it with a PowerPoint. Don't waste any time that you could deliver an asynchronous session, wasting time that we could use in more synchronous interactions. And I think that's something that's not going to change. And the last point is that we tend to forget we're addressing three things simultaneously. We're addressing a shift in modality, we're addressing structural racism, and we're addressing really high rates of unemployment at the same time. And so as this conversation floats from workforce relevance to online versus on-site, and addressing new components of a recognition of inequality and racism, those are three big topics, three big buckets that are not totally independent of one another, but are making all of us scramble in a period of time where we're trying to learn how to interact in settings like this.
Thank you. Those were great answers from you all. So I have one last question before we move on to Q&A, and this is also for all of you. Looking at the recent changes and events, what makes you hopeful?
I've been impressed.
Go ahead. Go.
I've been truly impressed with the resilience of our students. They work hard because their education is valuable to them. And I have been impressed with our faculty and staff and the support systems we have stepping up to meet the need in a condition that nobody would have imagined a year ago. Just, it's impressive.
Yeah, I would echo that and say, you know, we're talking about teaching on my campus. That's a big deal to have so many people talking about teaching and ensuring that students are learning. So that makes me really hopeful. The greater attention to equity and equity mindedness, as long overdue as it is really, it's so encouraging to hear people really interested in that. And the fact that we're openly talking about structural racism on our campuses and off our campuses and across those two spaces that are not really separate, that is, you know, again, that's cause for hope in addition to cause for a lot of really hard work.
Those are great answers. I would add to that some stretch conversations that are happening now that would have never happened prior to this. Around the value of Carnegie units and measuring how much time it takes people to try to do something versus how much they learn. You know, how do we make, there's some conversations now about how do you make time a variable and learning a constant, and we live in a world where that doesn't happen. The workforce pressure that we're facing with unemployment has conversations about micro-credentialing and competency-based learning that were just on the fringes of our conversations even 2 years ago. So now the combination of a shift in modality with workforce relevance has us rethinking how the registrar's office is going to credential and keep up with blockchain-related transcripts that are owned by the student. Those are things that we talked about as futuristic just 6 months ago. And now are moving much more rapidly towards, I wouldn't say mainstream, but at least a willingness to have the conversation.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add to that other than I'm hopeful about all of those things as well. And my one build to it is that people are out there trying those new things. And the fact that there isn't an uphill battle to try to test out something new is perhaps the the most encouraging and exciting and hopeful thing about this time, that we're doing it in service of the right things and the right outcomes, and we're trying new things where there would have been a ton of inertia preventing us from doing so previously. So I think that's all extraordinarily encouraging, in addition to what folks have all shared, which I concur with.
I agree with you all. It's definitely very reassuring as a student to hear from you guys. So I want to go ahead and open it up to questions from the audience, and anybody can answer this. So in the wake of the George Floyd and global protest, what are the strategies that specifically allocates resources to close the educational disparities in underserved communities of color? Can you list any changes in admission processes, financial assistance, and community outreach?
Great, I can start. We advertised a new scholarship program of $30 million for all Pell eligible students, which essentially makes their tuition free on campus. One of the access issues is around content and the cost of books and instruction. We've also eliminated that from all of our Pell eligible students, as well as all of our military, both veterans and active. So affordability is where we've focused initially, having been open access along the way. But we need to meet students where they are, because we are inheriting students with long histories of inequitable access, and to assume that they're all coming into the university at the same place really requires us to think very differently about the understanding their needs on the front end and being responsive to those needs.
Our faculty have begun looking at our curriculum with a very critical eye to ensure that what we are teaching, the course materials that we use, and the way we teach do not inadvertently carry on either racist or discriminatory practices. And I think that the conversation that is growing out of that is really quite remarkable. It's an elevated awareness with a sense of urgency to act and to make a difference now for our students and to educate one another. That's been a good conversation. That's been the topic of a lot of this summer.
I would just add, I think, in addition to individual programmatic resources going towards specific populations, really it is about a change in the way that you set up the systems that have and the processes and the business procedures under which those kind of structural racist pieces have perpetuated. So when we think about how to address equity in this moment, it's also about how we break down the types of things that have resulted in folks kind of falling out of education. And I think once you start from the perspective that there is really an asset-based view to every student that you serve, that somebody is coming to you having faced a lot of barriers, and in some cases, like Jody pointed out, education trauma, that in no way means that there is somehow a remedial need for them to overcome. It just changes the nature of the engagement and the services provided in a way that is more able to customize support for folks. So I think the sort of act of doing in terms of how you change the way that you work and the way that you do business and the way that you design programs is the thing that gets to the heart of dismantling the aspects of our system that have presented those barriers in the past. And the last thing I'll say is echoing kind of similar things that I had highlighted before, the point in time provision of the resources at a time when somebody needs them. So the right supports at the right time, the device access, the keeping the cost free or low cost to the extent that it's possible. Those are all ways in which we create conditions that enable folks who are high capacity, who are highly capable of having the conditions under which they can succeed.
Yeah, I mean, I would only add that, higher ed always, and the equity issues in higher ed, they're an elephant problem in the fundamental sense, right? Some people only see the trunk, some people only see the tail, some people only see the leg. And I think there's a messaging piece to this. When I read the list of student demands, I understand why the resources that we're allocating to course and curricular redesign don't seem like an appropriate response. But I also feel like if we're going to close these gaps, we also have to do that kind of deep rethinking about how we're delivering undergraduate education in particular. We can have another webinar on graduate education, which has its own problems. And so I think for the campus to really message about, here's a scholarship fund that we're putting for right now, and here's a tech access program that we're putting for right now, but also do a better job of explaining how redesigning academic programs helps us with time to degree, helps us with equity gaps, so that we can see that we need resources in so many different places, and that all of those resources are going to have to work together in order to get us to our outcome. Because, you can give more scholarship money, but if you're not changing your academic programs where students get hung up, you're not really addressing an equity problem. So I'm thinking a lot these days about how to kind of balance the different parts of the elephant.
Right. Thank you. Okay, so we have one final question from our audience. Are you all looking at curriculum changes in general education that directly responds to the future of the workforce, specifically in the tech space?
Okay, I'm gonna go first on that one and just say it only occurred to me recently that the students at UC Santa Cruz basically have the same general education requirements that I had as an undergraduate. And that is crazy when you think about it. Like, that is just wild that our students take a year of writing, which I'm not saying they shouldn't take a year of writing, but they don't have to take data analytics. They don't have to take, I think they have a small statistical responsibility, but really general education is from the 70s and 80s. And so right now I'm hearing a lot of talk about making sure that we have, more cultural awareness programming in our gen ed. And I think that's absolutely important, but I think this question gets at it. We need to take a big step back and ask, what are the skills that anybody needs to navigate this world that we're living in? And are we making absolutely sure that our students get those skills? Because I don't think we can keep going with a general education that looks the same way that it did. I'm not going to exactly give you my age, but that a while ago. So yes, that's the right question.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that thread, Jody. That's absolutely where we're starting out as well. We don't have a set of courses around general study. We're designing so that while we can coalesce around what those skills might be, they become an embedded part without distinction of context-specific education in a field of study that somebody is pursuing. So in IT, to take it as an example, what you want to think about are both the conditions that make somebody able to navigate a career in IT, and that's both an understanding of how that industry is operating, but it's also an understanding of the places in which new skills are emerging as baseline requirements for people to have mid-skilled jobs. And we are kind of mapping back from that understanding both of what we currently understand technology to be reshaping industries as in terms of the skills requirements, but also what's on the horizon of that. So what does the transition to cloud-based computing tell us about what the tasks are and the job functions are in firms and how those are changing, and how do we prepare people for the skills that they need now and the next set of jobs or on a career trajectory that they would need for the future. And that's not just passive forecasting like we've traditionally done. That's not just an alignment with what employers tell us in the moment, though that's part of the equation. We have to be thinking kind of ahead of the curve. We have to see around the bend for other folks. And so that's our approach to the program design.
For us, our majors have moved and adapted much more quickly than our general education requirements. The general education requirements we have are common throughout the California State University system, and so we have parameters around which we work. However, the mathematics and statistics and analytics requirements have been embedded for the last couple of years. And we do think writing is very, very important, but having some of the analytics has been an add-on, and then and statistics has been an add, and then the majors have picked up on trying to move forward with where industry is driving and what the technology tells us we should be preparing our students for.
And I think we have to be careful. It's certainly a topic where people are passionate, but nobody fully owns it across the institution, and we're constantly reconfiguring who has responsibility. But one of the things I would caution against is the transferability in creative systems, and do we actually add to the problem if we are having students being credentialed? And I think the same thing about micro-credentials in ways that are not useful to them should they go to a different institution. And it's complex, but I think we have some emerging solutions.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have left for today. So I want to give a big thank you to our panelists for your time and your very insightful answers, and the audience for joining us here today. I hope you all enjoyed this panel. Have a great day and take care.
Thanks, Patricia.
Thank you. Thanks, Patricia.
Thanks so much.